And for your top story this hour, newly released Jeffrey Epstein files include a reference to acclaimed filmmaker Mira Nair, the mother of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani, in a 2009 email sent to the late financier by publicist Peggy Segal. The email, which appears in a fresh tranche of documents released by the US Department of Justice, describes Segal leaving an after-party at the Manhattan townhouse of Ghislaine Maxwell following an event tied to Nair's 2009 film Amelia. The email goes on to comment on the reception of Amelia, writing that the film received a tepid reaction, before describing other industry events Segal planned to attend. The message was one of hundreds of thousands of documents unsealed as part of the Justice Department's latest disclosure related to Epstein's crimes and his interactions with prominent figures. We are now being joined by Ross Fingold in Taiwan, who is a political analyst. Thank you so much for joining us here today on NewsX World. So after these release of over 3 million pages of these Epstein files, what does the mention of Mira Nair in these newly released Epstein files actually tell us? And most importantly, what doesn't it tell us?
First, congratulations on joining NewsX. Yeah, as far as this release of additional files, it's going to be negative publicity for some of the prominent people who are mentioned. It doesn't matter who it is, whether it's a politician or a business person or people who span the worlds of business and politics, whose name appears, like Commerce Secretary Lutnick or X's Elon Musk. Or relatives of politicians. So, from the perspective of were powerful people friendly or famous people friendly with Jeffrey Epstein and interacted with him and continued to attend events with him or seek his counsel or financial support after his first conviction way back in 2008. We knew that was the case. Now we have a few more names and evidence that people who could have easily checked whether or not Epstein had a criminal record, they didn't bother to check, or if they knew, they ignored it. So for any of the prominent people whose name appears in the latest release, there will be some negative publicity and say, why were you still interacting with someone as despicable as this, even after he pled guilty to a crime back in 2008? But does it really indicate that these people were involved in criminal activity themselves? Of course it doesn't. So there'll be negative publicity, but I would expect all the prominent people whose names have appeared will probably survive this release of their names.
And does the political connection that Mira Nair is the mother of New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani change how these files are being perceived and discussed in the public sphere?
I think it just confirms for the public that Epstein had a very wide social network, people from different walks of life, whether the arts or academia. I mean, clearly he had a very close relationship with a number of academic institutions, including Harvard, among others, very prominent, obviously, academic institutions. Politicians, both in the United States as well as from outside the United States. So he had this very wide social network of prominent people. And again, it's going to be a negative for any of them, no matter who they are. As far as Mira Mamdani goes, I mean, he literally just began his term a few weeks ago. So there's nearly 4 more years of Mira Mamdani. There's nearly 4 more years of opportunities for him to demonstrate that he's an effective mayor, or for him to demonstrate that he was a bad choice by the voters. There's going to be a lot more issues, positive or negative, for Mayor Mamdani than this. So I don't think the public in New York City is going to hold this against him personally.
And obviously there's been names released as these files are also being released to the public. Should names from old social events be reported differently to names that are linked to clear allegations?
Generally speaking, the approach from judicial agencies in the United States, prosecutors, is typically not to release this information, but politics and the law that Congress passed last year forced their hand. But when this kind of information is typically released, the normal practice is to redact the names of people who were not actually accused of a crime. And frankly, that's why this information is typically not even released to the public to begin with, because people might be investigated or their names might appear in an accusation, and that is contained in the files that prosecutors or police will collect. But it could be completely false, or the behavior might be untoward and inappropriate, but not necessarily a crime. Typically this info isn't released. When it is, normally the authorities would redact the names of people who were not charged with a crime. But the reality in this situation is the names of many prominent people have been released or through these multiple tranches of documents that have been made public. There are other people who we've known for many years associated with Jeffrey Epstein. So at this point, it almost looks silly to say, well, we can't release the names of people who attended a social event with him, because again, we already know so many names anyway. Epstein was such an active person on the social scene, whether in New York City or Florida or elsewhere. So at this point, I would say hiding names of people who attended events with him, it looks kind of silly because so much information has already been released already.
And you just touched on it there, that so many people do go to these social gatherings that he's held, and he was a very prominent figure. But do you think, does the constant focus on who attended past Epstein-linked gatherings distract the accountability for the actual crimes?
Unfortunately, Epstein did not really face accountability for his crimes, other than that one plea agreement he reached about 18 years ago, which most people now believe was what in American legalese we would call a sweetheart deal. He got a really good deal from the prosecutors, very light punishment for soliciting prostitution, and he was arrested and facing more serious charges in 2019 when he committed suicide in jail. So Epstein himself barely faced any accountability, and for many of the other individuals who associated with him, it seems like authorities don't have enough to prosecute them, other than Maxwell, who is currently in jail, and she was convicted, and her convictions were upheld on appeal for facilitating the trafficking of underage women for Epstein. But all these other prominent people, up to now, it seems that it was distasteful and foolish that they associated with someone who, especially after he was already convicted of a crime, and they continued to do so for many years. But again, it appears, at least as of now, that these other prominent people have not engaged in any criminal behavior.
Thank you, Ross, for joining us, but don't go too far. We'll be back with you later. US President Donald Trump says Iran